All right, so welcome to the OpenBazaar developer meeting. It is May 16th, 2019. And the biggest thing by far that has happened over the past 5 weeks since the last developer call is the release of the 2.3.3 OpenBazaar version. And this version had several things in it. From the end user perspective, the biggest thing that you'll notice is the difference in the speed of listings loading, which is a dramatic improvement, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So for the 2.3.3 release, on the server side, there were four main things that were done. The first is an IPFS rebase. We rebased IPFS to version 0.4.19, and that allows us to take advantage of the IPFS AutoNat and Auto Relay features. Now, they are currently disabled by default, but the AutoNat and Auto Relay are useful for people that are by default unreachable with inbound connections. So, for example, mobile clients. So those, though they are disabled by default for now, that can be altered in the config file. You can change that. Excuse me. And for Haven, and for anyone else trying to build on mobile app, the fact that you can now use that should be very useful. So that was the rebase and the AutoNat stuff as well. We added a tiered routing system. So in the past, the routing that was sort of on IPFS just more or less was IPFS calls or IPNS calls. But what we've added is a way for the calls to be routed in several different ways, one of which is an API call. So instead of making necessarily an IPFS call, you can actually make an API call to a centralized server somewhere to get that information. And as of right now, I think the way that it has been set up, it still is it's tiered, with the first tier still being an IPFS or an IPNS call. And then a next tier is sort of the API call to OB1 infrastructure by default right now. That is configurable. And the plan moving forward is that once we are more confident that this tiered routing structure is stable and gives you speed and reliability improvements, we can then make that API call sort of the default with the IPFS calls in the background to make sure that everything's working correctly. Mike or Chris or anyone from the OB1 team, have I gotten that across accurately? This tiered routing stuff is a little bit complicated, so I want to make sure I'm characterizing that correctly.
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last thing that was included on the 2.3.3 from the server side is the ability to sweep the wallet. So up until this release, you kind of had to guess at trying to get your funds out, and now there's a feature to sweep the wallet. Now, though this is included on the server side, it is not yet included in the client. That's something that will come in the future, but the feature is now there on the server side. On the client side, as I mentioned, the biggest change is the speed improvement for loading listings. It used to be the case that you would load via IPNS, which often takes 30 seconds or even substantially longer than that sometimes. Instead, we're now loading by default IPFS, which is substantially faster, usually fractions of a second. And anyone who's browsed OpenBazaar since the last release will obviously have noticed this. It's pretty awesome. It does make an IPNS call as well. It just makes that sort of in the background. And if there's new information, the downside, I guess, to using IPFS call first is that it might not be the most up to date. So the IPNS call then makes sure the information's up to date. And if it's not, it'll give you a little message saying, that there's new information, and you click refresh, and you then have the newest information. So that has been great to see. Some other things on the client side: the default Discover page changed to display categories. So it used to sort of dump you into search and just have kind of all the listings there as a default search. Now instead it shows you different categories. I think the first one right now is trade. So I'm sorry, crypto listings. So being able to swap in and out of different currencies, and then things like art and electronics, etc. So check that out if you haven't yet. And there's a few other smaller things on the client side as well. The Tor search endpoints. If you had a provider that didn't offer a Tor endpoint previously, and you were using Tor, it didn't let you use that search provider, which didn't really make sense. So we changed it so that you could use their endpoint that wasn't Tor. It still goes through Tor, so it's still obfuscating the IP, but it doesn't demand that every search provider has a Tor endpoint. The Electron version was updated as well, just for security's sake. We also changed to make sure that the block explorers used are the ones that have better privacy policies by default. So that's on the 2.3.3 release side. On the Haven side, there really are too many things that have been going on to go through them all individually. That would take the rest of our time. There's been an immense amount of work going into this. Probably the single largest thing in the past 5 weeks has been the fact that a social component has been added into the application, which now makes it feature complete. I don't know if everyone here has seen sort of the mock-ups, or there are some people we've invited to kind of limited internal testing as well. But it's a social feed similar to Twitter. To Twitter. If you guys haven't yet signed up, you can go to gethaven.app, and it will allow you to sign up as soon as the app is available for open beta testing. One decision that was made to try to get the app out as quickly as we can is to not have Ethereum included at launch. We had hoped to have Ethereum functionality in the app, but it just became too much of an effort. So as I'll talk about in a minute, with the 2.4 release, Ethereum is going to be kind of the next big focus. But the Haven is nearly completed now with internal testing, and we're about to move to sort of an open beta testing phase, hopefully in the very near future. There are a few other things worth mentioning as well. There has been a lot of infrastructure work going on the OB1 side. One of those is to support the social features in Haven that I mentioned. This is not a part of the sort of core OpenBazaar protocol. So the OpenBazaar server and the OpenBazaar client don't have these particular social features that are in the Haven app inside of them. We have some things like the following and followers and chat, etc., but not these new ones. It is possible that those things are going to be included into the sort of core of OpenBazaar in the future. But Haven is sort of a bit of an experiment in that regard to see how useful it is to people, to see how people use that, and if it's really like fundamental to how people use the application, we may consider including it in OpenBazaar broadly. The other infrastructure work was the API routing, the tiered routing that I discussed earlier. A lot was done to get that working reliably, to improve speed and reliability. There's also been new SEC guidance put out, and that has made us try to answer some questions around the OpenBazaar token, something that we haven't talked about that much recently. That's still an open issue, so no particular new, nothing to share there, other than because of new SEC guidance, there are some questions about the approach we had that we're now trying to answer. The web development has continued. So in the past, we've talked about trying to get a buyer-only web experience, and that is still continuing, but we have hit some snags with JS IPFS. It's still fairly early in their development there, and some things that we thought should be working aren't. And that might be on our end, that might be on their end. We're trying to work with the Protocol Labs team to identify exactly why things aren't working correctly. But that development has slowed a little bit as we've taken some of those resources and devoted them toward the Ethereum integration on the client side. But development there still continues, and it's still at the prototype phase, but it's continuing. I mentioned that our team. I was muted momentarily. That wasn't on my end, so that was strange. But I'll continue. I mentioned last week that our team was out in Portland for a company retreat. All kinds of discussions there and planning. A lot of focus on Haven, because that's the thing that will be coming up most imminently. But focus on OpenBazaar as well, and how privacy works in both Haven and OpenBazaar, and doing what we can to improve the private aspect as best we can as well. As well as attending, we had some members attend Consensus and the current Token Summit as well. It's also worth mentioning that both folks within the Monero community and folks within the Steam community are attempting to integrate into OpenBazaar, integrate their coins within OpenBazaar. And if there's anyone here on the call, a part of those efforts, please feel free to jump in and explain how that's going, or feel free to put it in chat or whatnot. I'm happy to hear more about those efforts as well. Okay, so that is what has sort of been going on over the past month. Impartial Mod asks Steam as in Steam Games. No, not Steam as in Steam Games. That would also be awesome. This is STEEM, which is sort of I'm not sure how best to characterize Steam. A community of people using a cryptocurrency in ostensibly decentralized fashion for content sharing, creation, and sharing. They've been around for quite some time, and there have been attempts in the past to get Steam into OpenBazaar. I don't think anything materialized there, but this latest attempt seems fairly serious, as is true with Monero as well. Okay, so OB1 team on the call. Is there anything that I've missed that we've been working on over the past month or so that's worth highlighting? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Oh, Mike, did you want to add anything?
Yes. So I'm not. I do see one of the individuals who's helping with the Monero integration, and I don't see him volunteering any links or anything. So I will do so on his behalf. I'll paste a link into the chat with his analysis that he originally put together when exploring this integration. And he hasn't really given me permission to share his proof of concept screenshots, but I've seen screenshots that show transactions moving through the client using its own interface and everything. So really promising work from the Monero community there. Really exciting to see. So if anyone is looking to participate and help with those integrations, you'll find the Monero link in the chat, and I'm looking for the Steam information as we speak. I'll post that later.
All right, thank you for doing that, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to move on to where we plan to be going over the next 4 weeks. And the big push over the next month is going to be the 2.4 release. So the last release was 2.3.3, considered a minor release, though it had a pretty good amount in it. This is considered a major release, and the reason is because we're integrating Ethereum. That's the big push. And Ethereum is substantially different enough from Bitcoin, which OpenBazaar was originally built on, that it requires quite a few changes and quite a bit of work to get it to the point where you're able to to use it like you can any other coin. One of the biggest changes required is the level of precision needed. Bitcoin has less, needs less precision than Ethereum by a substantial margin. So that requires us to go through all of our code on both the server and the client side and make sure that precision is there, which is quite a bit of work. That work is in progress on both the server and the client side. It's fairly advanced on the server side, I believe, and I actually think it's fairly advanced on client as well. But the work is not yet complete, so that continues. The wallet user interface on the client side is also underway, and I think that's fairly well along as well. There's one other aspect for getting Ethereum integrated, which is the need for a smart contract for the escrow, if you're using escrowed Ethereum. And that actually had been completed quite some time ago, both the contract completed and fully audited, and all of the audit stuff taken care of as well. So that one's ready 100% to pull the trigger when we're there. We don't have a specific timeline for when 2.4 is going to come out. A good amount of the work has been done. As we mentioned, we had hoped to get Ethereum into Haven and have everything ready on the server side for that as well. Not quite there, but a decent amount of the 2.4 work has been done. And that's primarily it from the end user's perspective of 2.4. There's not really, like, the ability to use Ethereum is the big feature there. It is not going to have ERC20 token support yet. That is something that we intend to add down the road, but 2.4 will allow for straight up Ethereum to be used just as any other coin in the application. On the Haven side, 4 weeks from now, kind of hard to say exactly where it will be. It will definitely be in beta testing, if not actually launched outright. That is the hope. We're not putting out any dates yet in terms of things like launch, but we're very close and things are moving along fairly quickly. Are there any other things from the OB1 team that we'll be focusing on over the next month that I have not yet noted?
So we recently experienced an upgrade on the Bitcoin Cash network on May 15th. And some people may have been experiencing challenges transmitting transactions on BCH over the past day or so. We have been exploring that and believe that it might be related to the new consensus rules not working properly on the server. So if the fix has not already been deployed, it will be shortly, and that should be resolved. This was kind of a 0-day fix that I figured we'd mention.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay, so I've noticed in the comments, Acidity, I think that's how it's pronounced, is mentioning that people are having issues leaving feedback, not publishing. That is a bug that we are aware of. Well, we think it's a bug. Feedback is actually kind of a little strange in the way OpenBazaar works. Because IPFS, if we change the root hash of an IPFS node each time something small changed, like external feedback, then all of the caching would be broken on the network for each individual store. And so we have this system in place where small changes, things like feedback that external people can trigger, aren't actually published to the rest of the network until the vendor changes something more significant, changes a publish. And that sometimes leaves feedback being in this sort of limbo state where it's not, other people aren't seeing it even though it is there. Mike, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam is right with regard to, from the buyer's perspective, not seeing your feedback posted on the vendor's store. However, we have had some reports where the vendor is also reporting that the buyer is not able to send their feedback to the vendor, and the vendor is not seeing it completed as well. There has been a bit of a trend of, in certain cases, IPFS messages not being, I should correct that, OpenBazaar network messages, which are running on top of IPFS transports, not being delivered properly. And we have some ideas as far as how we want to approach fixing it, but the problem has been pretty elusive. So while we will say that in the majority of the cases, we do believe that the feedback will show on the vendor store once the vendor performs another publish, like a listing update or a profile change or something like that they initiate. We do see reports of messages not being completed properly and are focusing on trying to figure that out. I'll post some issues into the chat that we've been tracking that issue with for anyone interested.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So it's a combination of a weird UX because of the way OpenBazaar works and a bug. And so thanks, Mike, for summarizing that. Okay, so I'll look through the chat to make sure there's no outstanding questions that I haven't seen. Please, everyone, feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat, or just turn on your mic and speak up if there's anything you want to ask about. I know there's been some community stuff going on. I've seen some changes with Zocos. Rod, I see you're on the call. Would you like to talk through some of the stuff going on with Zocos recently?
Yeah, so I will start with some of the small news. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you just fine.
All right, so in small news, we became a verified moderator this month, and we've done our first few disputes. Something that was cool to see is that people are really liking the cryptocurrency listing feature. That's what we've seen a lot of. And the second thing is this verified moderator service is a precursor to enabling Zocos to use moderation. We're going to start with Zocos as the main moderator for our transactions when we first roll it out, just so we can make sure everything goes smoothly and that there's no issues, and if there are, we can fix them on our end. Later, our goal when we have this kind of stable is to open this up and have the community be the moderators for these transactions. As far as the progress goes for moderation, we're done with the code. We're just entering the test phase, and we hope to kind of have it ready and on the site by the end of the month. Other than that, we've just been kind of working on a laundry list of features to make sure Zocos is, stable and working day in and day out, and just fixing little bugs that we've seen. And that's about it from my end.
All right, thank you, Rod. And probably everyone on the call knows what Zocos is, but just in case they're not familiar, it's a service through a website that lets you run an OpenBazaar store as a vendor. So very, very convenient, and it's been great to see that develop over the next few months. Rod, I think your mic is still on, so if you want to... okay, I thought that was just an accident. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you, Rod, for that. We mentioned the Monero and Steam integration attempts earlier. Are there any other folks from the community who are trying to build on OpenBazaar or doing something interesting that they would like to put out there for the group? Feel free to jump on a mic or feel free to put it in the public chat otherwise.
While people in the chat are gathering themselves, there was a question from, I'm going to take a swing at this. I think it's AskKeyToD, but the inventory problems that we're having with crypto listings was actually a bit of a hacky test that we realized doesn't work as desired. We attempted to put our inventory system on top of IPFS's immutable persistent storage, but as you know, it expects the majority of the data to be immutable, and inventory changes quite frequently. So our test does not work quite as well as we'd like, and our inventory is very flaky as a result. So that's something we're aware of and are trying to fix. but hopefully crypto listings generally is not impacted, aside from the small cases, as you point out, when you don't have enough coin to fulfill the trade and have to cancel it. We realize that's a bad experience and hope that it's a reasonable shortcoming for a test like this.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And this is actually something that we talked about at the retreat ourselves. The fact that the crypto listing feature, we've gotten some really good feedback from people using it, saying that they really like it, but that there's not actually a ton of listings out there. I haven't checked recently, but there's like 150 or so listings out there. And, we're curious if the people using it find it that useful. How come there's only that many listings compared to the, 13,000 other listings out there? And so we talked about other ways to let people know, how this works, or other things that we can fix to make it better. Nothing actionable sort of came out of that other than a discussion, but we're always interested to hear from folks in the community about what they think. So if anyone has ideas on how they can make the crypto listing side more compelling, or even better, if they're willing to propose something specific or even build it, of course, it's all open source, so we'd love to see it. Please feel free to drop into our Slack to make those, to have that conversation and go from there. Rod has asked or stated, since becoming a moderator, they had 2 cases where buyers were unable to send offline, offline messages or writes to the DHT. Would Chris's work with the web relay code be helpful at all for delivering messages for client users?
And I'll just add on to that real fast. So with Zocos, we use that web relay code that I know doesn't get used, I don't think, at all with the actual client, but it works fantastic for us. So I was just wondering if there had been any thought of possibly sending messages also to like a third-party web relay to make sure they get sent over, or if there are any issues with that.
So I'll take that answer. Rod, yes, is the short answer. We're looking, ideally it can be opt-in, and all it would take would be for each individual peer that is behind like a NAT or a weird network configuration to announce to the swarm that they're also available through this relay. And that can be any relay, so it's a very federated design. And in the near to far future, we hope that we can allow users to opt into this behavior as kind of a supernode, which would allow them to act as a relay for other peers on the network. That's very far future thinking. But as soon as you're running 2.3.3, you should be, or 0.13.3 on the daemon side, you should be able to enable this for yourself just by running a relay of your own. We're also planning on putting some documentation together for this for people that are interested in trying it themselves. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for answering that.
I noticed Jimmy Jam mentioned that search can be finicky. Looking for a certain user or item doesn't always get the desired result. So there's potentially a few reasons for that. One is that the sort of default search experience within OpenBazaar right now is the OB1 search. And I'm sort of assuming everyone on the call is aware of this, but if not, OB1 is the company that is leading the development of the OpenBazaar software. OpenBazaar is fully open source, but OB1 has been sort of leading the development since the beginning. And the search, OB1 search, is censored. We're a US-based company, and we don't offer a full view of the network. We choose to censor listings that are illegal in the United States. So, if you're trying to find something that isn't legal, you're not going to find it through OB1 search, or you shouldn't be able to. But because not just the censorship, there's also the issue of making sure that the search is actually as up to date as possible, and we try very hard to make sure that it is, but sometimes there are listings that aren't immediately registered on the network. And on the other side too, there are sometimes listings that aren't available anymore on the network, but are still showing up in results. So you might click on a listing from search and it'll tell you, actually the store can't load, it's not there. So it definitely isn't perfect, but we're always trying to improve that. So if there are specific problems with search for OB1 search, please join the Slack or just hit us up with what's not working, and we'll attempt to improve that. Also, OB1 is no longer the only search engine available. Rod on the call created a search engine in the past called Raw Flood, and he open sourced that to the community. And I think there's at least one person who's set up a Raw Flood node and offered a search experience to the community as well. So feel free to check that out as well. Impartial Mod has asked, how do we check which listings are legal? So we have a reporting system. So if you've used the OpenBazaar client and you click on, or if you hover over the listings, they'll have a little flag in the bottom corner that says report this listing. People send reports in, and we go through and just check the reports and see if they are acceptable or not. That's up to every individual search provider to determine themselves. Every search provider can have different policies for how they handle that. OB1 is just a US-based company, so we just make legality our deciding factor. Uzuz, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, has asked, are there any plans or roadmap for version 3 Onion support, or generally Tor easy setup, like one-click setup or ClearNet Shop versus Onion Shop for non-tech anonymity people? Also, I'll take that question, the second question, in a moment. The answer is, I love this question because the answer is yes. Privacy is very important to us, and we know that the Tor devs have really been pushing people to get onto version 3 Onions. And so we definitely want to do that. This is something we discussed at our retreat, as well as getting Tor set up easily. In fact, Brian put quite a bit of effort into having a Tor binary bundled with the installer. We ran into some problems with that caused us to shift away from that momentarily, but we do want to return to that approach where the Tor binary will be bundled and it'll be very easy to use out of the box, not requiring any sort of changes that you have to do right now. Mike has just posted a link to the embedded Tor issue, which is not finished but is underway. I don't have a specific timeline for either the embedded Tor or for the version 3 Onions support. It would be post 2.4, but it's something that we definitely want to have done in the not too distant future. The second question was, are there plans to add different admin levels or permissions? And I mean, there are plans in a very much like, yes, this would be nice to have sort of way. There are no specific plans on the roadmap to implement this. We know it would be nice to have, but it's just not something that we have prioritized. I don't know if there's open issues for that. If there are, the issues are very old. If that's a feature that you would like to see, feel free to open an issue as a feature request on the OpenBazaar Go repository, just so that doesn't get lost. But it's not going to be something we focus on in the immediate future. Matt has asked if there are any plans to create a way to do search in an uncensorable way by default, or a one-click way to do that without having to rely on a third-party search provider. Wow, that's a great question. So there are plans in the past, and I don't know how many details of this are sort of public. We had something called channels, where it basically allowed you to curate and create a list of IPFS listings or stores, and then that list itself was shared on the IPFS network. So you basically had a censorship-resistant list of material that could be shared around that didn't have a given third didn't rely on a third-party provider to do. That has gone onto the back burner, but it is something that we've always wanted to have in order to both create a better browsing experience, allowing people to curate listings themselves and share these lists around, and also to provide better censorship resistance. Again, this is not something that is like on the forefront to focus on, but it's something we wanted to add. And if anyone is, if that's their thing and they want to help work on that, we'd love to have help there. It looks like Rod has posted a link to an OBIP. Thank you for doing that. An OpenBazaar improvement proposal for channels specifically. So please feel free to read. I forgot how detailed this was. We actually made it pretty far, I guess, in getting down this path, but we have not focused on it recently. So thank you, Rod, for posting that. We would love to have help actually fleshing that out. Let's see.
So I was thinking about the uncensorable search idea, and I think it could be feasible for someone to cobble together a crawler. The OpenBazaar API provides all the information you would need to query peers directly, and it would probably be pretty inconsequential to put together a script that will just crawl through the network looking for particular attributes on listings. If that's interesting or not to you, feel free to catch up with me in the Slack chat. I could walk you through how that would work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. And in fact, Rod, would it be correct in saying that raw flood could act like this? Like, you're not forced to open up raw flood to public. You could just run it locally, and it would effectively work like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure exactly what Matt's talking about, but I think a lot of people had said that they were just like, I just want an uncensorable search engine directly in the client. And Matt will have to say if that's what he's asking for, but I think from what I could tell, that's what a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah, so Mike, if you wouldn't mind, if you could post a link to the raw flood GitHub, that seems to be fairly straightforward in terms of its use, and unless you wanted to open it up to other people, you can just basically run that yourself, and it would be your own uncensorable, little uncensorable search engine yourself. So
yeah, I will add. Sorry, Sam, I should have. I didn't really answer the question directly for that, so I apologize. What I was saying for raw flood, if you do want to host it on your own, it will just act as a network crawler for yourself if you want to just kind of explore the network and just run it and not open it up for anybody. There's instructions on Zocos for getting it set up pretty easily, and I'll post that in a second here.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, that's one of the things I was most excited to see in the past few months from the community is raw flood being open source, because it's just such a useful thing to put out there. So thanks again, Rod, for doing that. All right, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so sort of last call. If anyone has anything they want to comment or question on before we wrap up this call. Yeah, you were saying thanks for the V3 or Tor support out of the box. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've wanted for a really long time. The Tor support out of the box specifically. At least I've wanted for a really long time, along with support for privacy operating systems like Tails or Unix or whatnot. We always have to balance these things against the proportion of our user base that are going to find it useful. So I think Tor out of the box, there's enough people that would find it useful that we're going to put effort into that. Are there enough people that would find it useful to, for example, have it out of the box in Tails? That's probably a relatively small portion of the overall community that really desire that. So we probably are not going to put resources into doing that, at least in the near future, because there are more important things we want to do. But because it's open source, we would love to have help to get it into Tails or other privacy operating systems or other privacy focused features. So I specifically am actually working on improving privacy within Haven and OpenBazaar. That is currently my main role. So if anyone wants to help with that effort, please reach out to me. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Join our Slack and send me a message, and I'll let you know how I can help. Raz has asked, do I need to keep my Windows box running 24/7? So yeah, Mike has already answered that you don't need to do that. Exactly as he says, every 7 days. You need to run it at least once every 7 days for your listings to not drop out of the network, for them to be seen by other people. And as long as there are other people rehosting your stuff for you, which does happen by default due to infrastructure we run, you should be fine. Now, there are advantages to keeping your node running and not going offline and coming back on and on offline frequently. Some of the advantages are the orders placed on your store, if you're a vendor, are not offline orders, which often will have one extra fee for going into a multi-sig. And in theory, networking might work better if your store is online instead of offline in some cases. So, if there's no cost to running a node, sure, leave it online, but you don't need to. It should work fine without that requirement. Raz also asks, if you change your IP because of a VPN, does it mess anything up? That is a good question. In my experience, it does not cause problems, other than if you're using a VPN, then you're probably not accepting inbound connections. So just be aware that, port forwarding, if you're not behind a VPN, like port forwarding, I forget which port it is right now, we have that in our help documentation, is a good idea. It helps you be more accessible on the network. If you're running a VPN, you're probably not going to be that accessible for inbound communications, but it should all still work. Mike, have I characterized that correctly?
Yes, you have. You're going to want to open port 4002 and 5. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank as well. I'll post a link in the chat.
Yeah. So VPNs are fine. Now, of course, the caveat is, you need to trust your VPN provider. VPNs are kind of a double-edged sword there. But if you trust your VPN provider, then they can help obfuscate your IP address to some extent. Obviously, Tor is better, but it also requires more work to set up, and it can slow down your connections to some extent as well. It does make using OpenBazaar a bit slower on Tor, though it's still fairly usable. I'm always pleasantly surprised to see just how usable the OpenBazaar network is over Tor. It's always good to see. All right, well, it is now a quarter to noon. I don't see any new questions in the chat. This has been great. It's great to see a whole bunch of people joining us. Please feel free to continue the conversation in Slack. I'll end by noting that Ooze has said Tor or I2P. So currently OpenBazaar does not support I2P. It's something we've sort of talked about, but Tor having more mindshare, more eyes, more acceptance has led us toward using Tor. If there were a bunch of people in the I2P community who really were willing to contribute and get it working on OpenBazaar, we would certainly look at that. I have nothing against it, but at this point, Tor is easier to integrate and more widely used and potentially more secure. Right? It's hard to say. Okay. Well, thanks again, everyone, for showing up. Please continue the conversation on Slack, and hopefully see you all 4 weeks from now. Everyone have a great day.